All right, good morning, or it's morning here at least. I don't know when you're watching this, but I hope everybody is doing well and is healthy, and your families are healthy and safe, and in this time. So uh, this is the lecture for chapter 10, for what it's worth. We're going to go through the PowerPoints again, and I haven't read your journals. I know you just turned them. They're due actually because I'm recording this ahead of time. They're not even due until tonight, I believe. So once I get that, if I have any feedback, I'll send an announcement or something. Okay. So, but during this video, I'm gonna probably I will mention or show something that's gonna that I want you to put at the bottom of your journal entry, like whatever it is. Okay, and I'll highlight it during the discussion. Okay, so same format. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoints, walk through it, mention a few things, and okay, we'll see where it goes. Let's see how this works. No. Oh, okay. I need to do it. Hang on. Sorry. Sorry about the interruption, but I messed up. All right, here we go. Why am I in the middle of the screen over here? Is that better? I hope. So I go to slideshow from the beginning. There we go. All right, so chapter 10. I don't know why. Oh, hold on. Chapter 10, sorry. Gender roles, expectations, and behaviors, right? We talked about this. This is nothing new. You guys have read the chapter, maybe. Well, I'm sure, but I'm guessing by now you read it because the quiz was due, right? So let's see how this goes, right? So we're going to talk about how our sexual gender identity versus sexual identity, sexual orientation, etc. Okay, so this is a picture. I think that though it's not explained, is supposed to be like, what gender is this person? Can you tell just by looking at this picture? And really the answer is no, right? You can't. So we have our learning objectives, how the characteristics of sex and gender are separate and distinct concepts, how to summarize and discuss the development of a person's biological sex, like how do we develop sexually, how does our anatomy develop sexually, right? The development of gender identity, both biological and environmental, so nature versus nurture, right? The same old long time argument. Transgender identities and different variations of gender expression, and the issue of sex and reassignment surgery and all that goes along with the transgender thing. I think I'm gonna have to kick my dog out because he can't stop playing. Hey, lay down. That'll only last a minute. And we're going to analyze how gender identity and sexual orientation are not the same, right? They're not always the same, and how they may, how they interact. We'll talk about stereotypes, right? Stereotypes is a big deal in all forms of psychology, but particularly among this population. And how do stereotypes originate, etc. All right. As I mentioned before, nature versus nurture. and androgyny. A very complex and fairly new concept, relatively new, I guess I should say, right? All right, so we're going to talk about how does all this come about, right? So if you read about Christine Jorgensen, you know that she was born George Jorgensen and a male, psychologically believed himself to be a female, and had the first sex change operation that received worldwide attention. That was 1953, like a lifetime. That was before I was born. Not much, but a little. All right, so here's George in the military, and then George after surgery. And we're talking about sex reassignment surgery, right, where his male organs were removed and replaced by and turned into female organs. Very complex surgery, particularly at that time. Hi, so sex and gender, right? My gender does not control who I'm attracted to, obviously, right? So sex, I can have feelings for anybody, and has nothing to do with my gender identity necessarily. For most of us, we're heterosexual. I think the majority of people are heterosexuals, but that's not the case. And of course, we know now that there are many more people, as people are more free to express themselves and who they really are. And you find that it's a growing population, but is the question that's not in the book is this really a growing population, or just a more awareness and a more able to express themselves rather than hide in the proverbial closet? Adam, so we're going to talk about androgyny through this process, right? People who don't necessarily demonstrate their gender through the traditional cultural aspects of hair, clothes, jewelry, etc. They prefer to not necessarily demonstrate any strong male or female character, I guess. And when I say character, I don't mean their personality, I mean their physical presentation, right? So, of course, right, your sex is your chromosomes, XY, XXY, determine how we are, our sex, our biological sex, right? And this is how our anatomical sexual organs go during pregnancy, and how we grow, and how this comes about, right? And typically we are XX or XY, right? And so, but that's not true of everybody. And of course, there's variations on this that in the past were looked on very differently, right? Historically, we know that things changed. And that our view of things right now is much different than it was 50 years ago. So there's a number of syndromes talked about in the book, Klinefelter, and let's see, Turner syndrome, right, where our sexual organs do not, and our chromosomes are not lined up correctly, and so there's development. The people don't develop along the lines the average person. There we go. Right, so Klinefelter syndrome, right, for males, it's like they have an XXY versus an XY chromosome matchup, and it leads to some health issues of some sort, or risks, I guess, not necessarily issues, but they're 50 times more likely than the average XY male to have breast cancer. That's a pretty serious thing, right? Same thing in their body shape and things that can cause them, depending on who they are and how accepting they are of themselves and their situation, can cause some both the physical issues and can, right, challenge them psychologically. Yeah. And the same thing with Turner syndrome, right? It's where instead of an a perfect XX match, you have some sort of issue with one of the X chromosomes, and so you're not the average person again, so, like we say, right? So disorders of sexual development, basically. And in many kinds, I went through all of this already, sorry. Sometimes, right, so disorders of sexual development, right? Males with female external genitals, females with male external genitals, genetically female with ambiguous, and so all kinds of things happen, right? I talked about this during pregnancy, right? The fact it's a miracle how often things work out right versus when all the chromosomes need to pair up and all the things that need to go right? So here's one of those things that doesn't necessarily go right all the time, right? And then, and so, and oftentimes these are repaired at birth. So there's a controversy, right, that people are not given a choice. Like parents may decide, right? Doctors may make a decision, and the actual person, of course, isn't capable of making decisions, has no say in the process. So their genitals are repaired. Often it can, when they can be, are repaired, and they are then this is biological sex that was determined by the doctor or whoever. There is a growing number of people that want this process to change, and so they would like, I don't know, I guess, I think so. It's a much different process if you wait until somebody's old enough to have a say in what's going to happen versus doing it at birth. But I'm not a doctor, so I don't know, but it just seems that way. So the develop gender identity now. So your gender identity is who you feel you are, right? I could be born physically a male, but I could really feel psychologically I'm a woman, right? And physically it has to do with hormones and different things. And then of course, we go back to nature, your hormonal balance or whatever the case may be. And nurture, how you're brought up, right? So there's still a lot of pressure to be heterosexual in our society. It's just that way, right? So most of the time, children are gravitated to their same-sex friends, right? This is really just the way it works. But then there are those children that are not, right? But we're socialized like that. Team sports, right? There's boy sports and girl sports. Girls boys play with trucks, girls play with dogs. Like there's all these roles, right? And parents tend to naturally feed into these roles. Like you have a son, you think so you do the things that you would do for boys. If that boy is not conforming to that, and some very, very well may not conform to that at a very young age, then it's something that's something that has to be dealt with, right? But our parents, our peers, if you don't if you're a young boy who's socializing with the girls, that's looked on as strange by your peers, and they make fun of you, etc., right? All kinds of things, right? Everybody is geared towards heterosexuality, being heterosexual in our society, pretty much. So, and then here we are. So we have a transgender person whose gender identity, their psychological identity, is different than this biological sex, right? And in the DSM, we have gender identity disorder, gender dysphoria, and there's other ways to do. Some people are transsexual, right? And then, of course, sex reassignment surgery, which is goes on, you know, like I said, dating back to the 50s. And a person can literally transforms from a male to a female or a female to a male, vice versa. Chaz Bono, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Sonny and Cher, right? They're pretty old. Cher is still around, but Sonny died. And so, but they had a daughter who then who's a transgender and now prefers to be a male and presents as a male. I don't know if he actually had the surgery, but I know that it's been a long time, since his teen years. This is kind of, or his late teens, early 20s, this has been his case. And so here's the thing. Here's what you need to write down at the bottom of your journal article this week. In the past decade, there was a transgender surgery that occurred with somebody who is very popular in the very pop culture. So tell me which transgender surgery got the most publicity in the past decade. Okay, so remember that. I need her name at the bottom of your journal article that tells me who that was, right? A pop culture person, kind of. Certainly got a lot of publicity when they had the sex reassignment surgery in the last decade. I want you to tell me who that was, okay? So typically this doesn't happen until puberty, like when you're starting to develop your sexual identity, right? But it can have, children can feel this way, you know, at a younger age, and then that's it, right? So they decide they're a thing. They're a child at a very young age. They decide they're the other gender, and they start dressing that way and behaving that way, right? Having taken on the characteristics of the other gender. And parents can either support this or try to fight it, right? There is a long history, right? So these people are just like, these kids know this is who they are, right? And they make this move at a younger age than normal. So, and there are tons of ways that parents block this, right? So conversion therapy, all the way back to 1899, right? I think Albert von Schrenck-Notzing is a psychiatrist who declared back in 1899 that he could turn homosexual men into heterosexual men in 45 sessions of psychotherapy and several visits to the brothel. Like, this is what is decided, right? And this went on, so conversion therapy of types went on well into the 20th century, and it was not all that, probably 20 years ago, that it was a huge controversy. Longer, I'm sorry, probably back at the late 80s, early 90s or something. It became a huge controversy again, and was eventually outlawed in some states. However, it went on for a long time. So Dr. Eugene Steinbeck, another psychologist, right, a doctor actually, an MD, decided that homosexuality was rooted in your testicles. And then the problem was your testicles were homosexual, but you were not. And he actually did testicle transplants where he would remove the homosexual testicles and replace them with heterosexual testicles. And I didn't bother to read where he was getting the heterosexual testicles, but he literally did a few of these surgeries and got away with it. And then, of course, Freud, right, our favorite sexual psychoanalyst, decided that it was certainly all nurture. He, believed that it was society that dictated how you this. So now, of course, we have the LGBTQ community, and much more open about this, much more accepting. Not everywhere, but for the most part, this is a much bigger, and people are much more open about their gender identity and their sexual orientation and what's going on. They know. So, but that was not always the case, and the LGBTQ community has been subject to many types of conversion therapy, including electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, right? Lobotomies, like people have had lobotomies, right? Brain surgery on the frontal lobe to try to turn them and make them heterosexual, right? Robert Heath down in New Orleans was a doctor who actually put electrodes directly into the brain to stimulate for shock therapy, and thought with that and some trips to the prostitutes, the use of prostitutes and pornography would change people and make them heterosexual. And as I've said before, it wasn't until 1973 that it was finally removed from the DSM as a mental disorder. So we have society as a whole has fought hard against homosexuality, but for the most part, that has changed. And here's some just sexual identity. We went through this chart, and you saw the chart. Hopefully you went through it, but I can't say, right? So now we'll move on to stereotypes, right? All right, so here we go, right? There's no girl cowboys in here, I don't believe, right? And there's no boy bunnies or princesses. Right, so this is we as parents, even unwittingly or unknowingly, just go with the flow of society, right? And we dress our baby girls in pink, and we dress our baby boys in blue, and onward, right? It starts right at birth, right? So when you look at occupations, right, these are all fairly neutral occupations that anybody could do, and yet men typically outnumber. And psychologist is one where it's female. I worked in the mental health field myself, and then it was predominantly women. therapists, administrators, all the way up and down the line. Stereotypes in general. How are stereotypes, right? Boys are more aggressive, girls are more passive, blah, 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 on and on, right? And stereotypes typically come from some observation. They're anecdotal, usually, rather than proven fact. That's why they're just called stereotypes. Anytime you say everybody or all or always, its chances are it's not true. Stereotypes, of course, do typically have some little small basis of truth, but the problem is then they're applied to everybody, and that makes it a problem. That's where the issue comes in. And so stereotypes are not just, you deal with stereotypes about race, ethnicity, cultures, or every group, unfortunately, they are invasive to our entire society. So here's a look at some aggression studies about how boys are more aggressive than girls, right? But that does not include every boy. There's the types of aggressive behavior, right? And I don't know if I think it talks about this in the book, right? But girls, I had both sons and daughters. Girls, here we go. The malicious rumors, the social osmosis. This is a type of aggression that girls seem to excel at much better than boys, if I remember correctly. So then, girls, so is there a difference in the relationship of boys versus girls, right? If you look at the diagrams, if you had a visual graph, so the overlapping curve model, right, demonstrates where our behaviors are separate, and then of course where our behaviors are similar. So I don't know if you're aware of Venn drawings. We have the two circles typically, right? And they overlap somewhere in the middle, and that middle part is our shared characteristics, and then the outer parts are our unshared characteristics. And the overlapping curve model by Kinzer is just a version of that on a graph rather than a Venn diagram. So, people with different gender identities, are they, one of the stereotypes, of course, is they can't maintain an intimate relationship where, I don't know, I think maybe for the most part that's might be wrong. I don't know. Anyway, so how does this go? So here we are back to the nature, right, versus nurture, and gender differences. Certainly are socio-cultural expectations. There's like I've been saying all along, there's a lot of pressure to be heterosexual, intentional or not. It's just the way our society is built around being heterosexual. And it's taken a long, and ask anybody in the LGBT community, they'll tell you it's a long way from equality and a long way from fair representation. Right? And so how does that work, right? So nature, right? So here us in Pakistan and India just believe they are neither, right? And they're men that dress like women, and I don't hear that they don't have any sex surgeries or anything like that, right? It's just like that's it, and that's how they behave. And they're accepted, which is a strange kind of fact, because in the next chapter we'll talk about what that could possibly. Well, it's it's very different. We'll tell you in chapter 11. We'll talk a little bit about them again. And then, of course, some of them do have their male organs removed. I'm sorry. And then it's all the nurture side. So they feel that way from birth, right? This is the assumption. And then the nurture side. So males that dress, they don't identify themselves, but they dress as females. They're males. They may or may not have their male sex organs anymore, but they are considered a third sex. So they're not androgynous. They dress as females. They are expressing some sexual identity, but not the one they're born with. Not the sex biology. So of course, like everything else, it's not so black and white, right? So if you look at if you were to think about a scale, right, and traits, right, think about sexuality along a continuum, rather than I am purely heterosexual or purely homosexual, and in between I am bisexual or androgyny or any of those things, right? Though people may not be willing to admit it, a totally heterosexual male or female could find one person that they see or cross paths with sexually attracted. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to act on that, but will people admit that? All right, because most of the times that can very well happen, and because you're not just in the black and white ends of the continuum. We're right. We like everything else in life. It's more in the gray area. It's not at those ends, at those extremes. And it doesn't mean because you see a person of the same biological sex that you're attracted to that you are homosexual necessarily. It's just something that happened, right? And then, of course, when we talk about androgyny, it's a whole nother level of people that do not, who wish to not present as either sex. They want to be as neutral, sexually neutral as possible in their presentation. Everyone, you see people like this, and they may or may not get your attention depending on what's happening at the moment. But oftentimes it is enough to get your attention because it's not the norm, right? It's depending on how far they go to hide their sexual identity. Anyway, that is gender roles in chapter 10. Remember the question for the journal. Lay down. Hey, lay down. Sorry. And I hope you have a good week, and I hope you all stay safe, and I hope you all are getting through this as best you can and adjusting as much as possible to our current norm. Okay, we'll see you later.